What's going on, everyone? This is Gaurav and welcome to my learning channel. So in today's video, I'll take you through what are some of the key things you should include in your resume if you're starting as a data analyst and you don't have any relevant experience. So this video is suitable for someone who has no experience or has no relevant experience, meaning you're switching from one particular industry to another. So say for instance, if you have worked in a particular industry, let's say you are a teacher for 10, 15, 20 years, but now you would like to explore the data industry, this is the perfect video for you. And as a matter of fact, the resume that we are going to discuss today is about a person who has been working in a teaching industry for the last 15 years, but now would like to move towards a data analyst industry. All right, when you're making a resume, among other things, these are the top 3 things that you should keep in your mind. First one is always try to highlight facts from your professional life which is relevant to this particular role. So no need to include things like, hey, I got a first prize award in your fashion show that you might have participated in your college, or for that matter, you got the best teacher award when you're working as a teacher for last 15 years. Second one is it is not only okay, but an absolute must to include the learning project that you're working on in your personal time. And we will talk a little bit more about in details as we go through the sample resume. And third and the last thing is, and this is something that I'm going to probably say this multiple times today, is do not lie on your resume. Your one lie will basically ensure that every single word on your resume that you have written will be viewed as a lie. So just stick to your guns, right? And highlight only those things that you are very comfortable and you can defend as a part of your resume. And when you're making a resume, and if you realize that there are certain key skills that you should have had and you don't have it at this point in time, it's totally fine. You don't have to include that at this point in time, but rather you should start working on those skills. And anything in the data industry is designed in a way that in a span of 1 to 2 months, you can get like a basic level of understanding for pretty much any of the topic that you can talk about. Okay, with that, now let's take a look at the sample resume and let's go through some of the key details that you should include as a part of your resume if you're starting out as a data analyst. Okay, so first thing first, this is really a sample resume. So in case you do see any kind of a typo error, please ignore that. This is just to kind of give you an idea on how to make a resume. So let's first of all talk about the overall length of resume. This is really a subjective topic, but if you ask me, I would say that if you're starting your career in a data analyst industry, then you should keep your resume to just 1 page. As you grow further into the role, and if you have like 10, maybe 15 years of experience, then afterwards you could potentially graduate more into a 2 page resume. At any point in time, you should not have more than 2 pages in your resume. So if you have a resume which has like 4 or 5 different pages, absolutely cut it down. And I would strongly recommend that let's just try to keep it as a 1 page resume. Trust me, everything that you want to say can be concise as a part of a 1 page resume. Second thing is overall format of your resume, which could potentially include things like color or the boxes that you're going to include. So all of those things are also very subjective, but here is the key guiding principles I would suggest. It's really a very fine balance. First of all, you should try not to make it so bland that it just looks like a big, huge text where things are written like line by line and it's kind of impossible to parse through and it does become a little bit boring. So you should definitely not do that. But at the same time, you should also try to stay away from a format which is very flashy and jazzy. So say for instance, if you have a format where you can potentially include your photographs, or you have big box which like a lot of different colors, I would definitely steer clear off of those. And I'll tell you the reasoning why. Think of it from the person who is reviewing a resume. So say for instance, if I am hiring for an open position in my team and I have like 2 to 3 different open positions, I might have an access to about 40 to 50 different resumes. If I have to glance through those and if I have to shortlist, I would be very happy if there is a little bit of a consistency across the format. And if I find some format of the resume that I have never seen before, it'd be a little bit difficult for me to figure out which parts I should be focused on. So like for instance, I'll give you one example, and this is really one of the resume that I have seen in the last few days. It had like 3 different sections. So you had 3 boxes. One box was right here, another one box was right here, and the third box was right on the right side. And then you had details for each one of these. I was finding it a little bit difficult, first of all, to understand should I go for like top to bottom on the first box, and then afterwards I should focus on the second box and third box. Now you need to understand that if I have allocated 1 to 2 minutes per resume, and if I have to spend like 30 seconds just to understand the format, that's basically the 30 seconds that I could have potentially focused on the overall content of things itself. So bottom line is try to stick to a format which is not very bland, but at the same time, it is able to convey all the message. Third thing is your overall organization of resume. So first section is your name. Definitely mention your name over here. And then afterwards, mention everything that is related to your PII. PII as in your personal identifying information. Now, as a part of the location, you should just stick to the state and city and country, and that's about it. This is the most granular level of information that you're going to provide. You should not mention things like street address or your apartment number or things like that. First of all, those are very irrelevant information. It's not going to add any value. And second, it could also potentially result in your ID theft. Now, the reason you want to mention city and state is because this will potentially give your employer an idea whether or not you will have to relocate from one place to another. On top of it, you should definitely mention your phone number and email address because these are the two mode of communication with which your employer can reach out to you. Once you're done with this, then you move on to the next line. This is where I have kept it pretty bland at this point in time. But if you have some details here, then you should definitely highlight it. Try to use some sort of a color code, make some boxes, just be innovative a little bit as compared to what I have done here. So first section over here is your sample portfolio. If you don't know what a sample portfolio is, please do check out some of the videos that I have made about what is a sample portfolio. But at a high level summary, I would say a sample portfolio contains all of the learning projects that you have worked on end to end in a packaged format. You should mention that in a particular website. I would strongly suggest to get a domain name. It's very cheap these days to get a domain name. There are a lot of domain providers which also provide these services for free. It's just that you will have their name in your website, which I think is absolutely fine. I would also suggest to make it a link so that somebody can potentially come here and click on it, because for the most part, whoever is reviewing your resume is probably going to review it on their computer. Then afterwards, you should mention your Git address. If you don't have any Git address, and that's a concern, you should definitely go ahead and create it and put all your code bases over there. This is definitely absolute must, so do not omit this. Definitely add your Git address, especially if you're getting started in this particular field. And the last section is your LinkedIn address. This is also your link where somebody can just go ahead and click on it and go to your social media and then take a look at all the things that you have done. I would strongly suggest to just stick to LinkedIn. Do not mention things which is Facebook or TikTok or anything else. Once you're done with this, then you should move on to the next section. This is where I would strongly suggest to keep your core competencies. This is where you should highlight some of the key core competencies that you already have. Now, if you're starting up in the data industry, then these are bare minimum 6 key skills that you should have. So you should know how to code in Python. You should know about SQL. PySpark is also good to have, but even if you don't have it, that's fine. You should definitely have some level of exposure to machine learning algorithms. And then apart from that, you should also have some level of exposure to AWS. And the last section is for data visualization, which is where you can mention things like Tableau or Power BI. Once you're done with this, then you should highlight anything extra that you want to highlight. So over here, I want to say that this person has worked quite extensively on some of the key algorithms, which is k-nearest neighbor, gradient boosting machine, XGBoost, and clustering. Now, anything that you mention as a part of a core competency, you have to be very, very careful because this is really a top of your resume. So anything that you mention here, you should be fairly confident about. It's very much possible that, let's say, for instance, if I mentioned k-nearest neighbor, your interviewer is going to start talking about k-nearest neighbor as a first topic itself. So your first question could be, hey, I see that you have mentioned k-nearest neighbor as some of the core competencies. Why don't you just tell me a little bit more about the type of projects that you have worked on as a part of k-nearest neighbor? Now, at that point in time, if you have exaggerated on your resume and if you don't know what k-nearest neighbor is, the whole conversation could potentially get derailed. That's where I would strongly suggest to just stick to your guns, stick to the core things that you can really, really defend in the interview settings, and then try to mention only those things as a part of your core competencies. Once you're done with this section, this is where things become a little bit more subjective. So I'll tell you some of the key guiding principles on the next set of sections that you should keep in your resume. There are two main guiding principles. The first one is try to highlight things which really aligns with the type of skills that the person is looking for, that your employer is looking for as a part of that particular open position. So if your personal project helps you convey that message, then you should definitely keep that. Otherwise, if it is your professional experience, then you should keep that. Essentially, the idea is that the next section right after core competency is something that will help you establish the fact that you have already done some of the work which is needed as a part of this particular open position. Now, this particular resume is about a person who has already worked in a school as a maths teacher for last 15 years. So this person has been working as a teacher in a school, and now this person is trying to move into a data industry. That's why I have kept the professional experience a little later in the resume. Rather, I'm getting started with a personal project because as a part of a personal project, I can highlight some of the project that this person has worked on, which is very much relevant to the open position that we're talking about. So we will go through some of these projects in detail in a few minutes, but before that, let's take a look at some of the other contents as well. So right at the bottom, you will see that you have two more sections. So first one is your award and recognition, and then afterwards you have education. Again, even over here, you should just follow the two guiding principles that we just talked about. If you think that any of the details which relates to the education, like say for instance, if you have done any kind of a master's which is in a data analytics, then you should highlight that at the top of your resume. But if not, like for instance, this particular person has done a bachelor of education, so this is not very relevant to the data analyst industry. That's why I put it as a bottom. Same goes for your awards and recognition as well. If you have received any of the award which is related to your data science industry, then you should definitely highlight that. And if that thing has happened in the recent time, so say for instance, if that event has happened in the last 4 to 5 years, then you should definitely highlight that. However, if you have participated in some quiz or some project like 10 to 15 years ago, even if you have done a lot of good work over there, there is no point in highlighting that because it's been really a long while. Okay, so with that, let's take a look at some of the personal project that this person has worked on. Now, as a part of a personal project, I have picked 3 different projects, but these 3 projects are really hand-picked and they are all highlighting a key skills which is required to be a good data analyst. I'm first of all writing the heading for this particular project. So this particular project is social network analysis for fraudulent customer identification. Now, personally, I have worked on this particular project. I did work on this particular project when I was working for one of the employer, but similar data is also available in Kaggle, so you can definitely access some of the information from there. So once you have specified the heading for this particular project, then afterwards you should mention where did you get this data from. For this particular resume, I have specified 3 different sources. So you have first one is your competition, which is you participated in some sort of a competition and whoever was organizing the competition basically provided you that data. Second one is, let's say that you got this data from your own website. So whoever is coming to your website, you have put some data tracker over there, and then as a part of that, you're collecting all of that information and you have done the analytics on top of it. And third one could also be something like a Kaggle, or you just downloaded the data from Twitter. Twitter data is something which is kind of very famous for sentiment analysis, so feel free to include that as well. The next section over here is the time. So this is the time when you actually completed this project. So for instance, this particular project was completed in February 2024. It's probably a good idea to organize the projects in a way so that the most recent one is at the top and then afterwards you keep on going downwards. So with that, let's take a look at this particular project. So over here, we have used social network analysis for a fraudulent customer identification. The first line says that leverage Python-based network X solution to identify, now clearly you can see that I have put a typo here, to identify complex network of malicious customers. I'll give you a little bit basic understanding of this particular project first. So as a part of this project, I had access to all of the data that is typically being captured whenever you're trying to applying for a new banking product. And these are some of the things like your IP address, your device ID, whether or not you're using any kind of a VPN and so on. The idea here was to identify how many of these applications are really initiated by human beings as compared to something that has been initiated by a bot. Now, typically, whenever fraudsters are using a bot, then they will go to a greater length to mask all of the information or falsify most of the information. However, banks have a really sophisticated way of capturing all of the information. So it's kind of difficult for bot to basically just falsify all the information which is available at their disposal. This is where the hypothesis is that, let's say even if 50% of the data is falsified and the rest of the 50% is accurate, I can still go ahead and use an algorithm like Network X. And again, this is something which is probably like years ago. So maybe there's a new algorithm available at this point in time. So can I use some algorithm like Network X to just link all of these application details just to see that are these applications really initiated by a bot or not? Once you have done that, then we move on to the next step, which is use some sort of a classification algorithm. So in this case, I was using XGBoost. Idea was that can I use some sort of a predictive algorithm to further identify that whether or not this particular application is a fraudulent application, which might or might not have been initiated by a bot. So one of the input for this particular model is going to be information which is coming from your Network X. Now, once you have done that, then you can test the overall accuracy. The third line is definitely made up. This is something that I haven't done it myself, but essentially what I'm trying to portray is that if you are working on a project like this, and if this is something like this is part of a competition, and if you have built a good model, if you have used a good solid algorithm, then you might be able to identify the 65% of your malicious customers as a part of your test data. And I'm also saying that as a token of recognition, you have received about $3,000 cash prize for scoring the highest accuracy among the other people who might have participated. So what are some of the key messages that we are trying to deliver as a part of this project? First one is you understand Python, because right in the first line itself, I have mentioned that I leveraged Python. So I'm also trying to convey that I have exposure to all of the different packages that is out there in Python, and I've already worked on some of these things, which has given me a pretty good result. And the second part is that you have exposure to some of the classification algorithms such as XGBoost. So this itself will give you a good platform to talk to your interviewer. Then you move on to the next project. So once you have highlighted that these are some of the key skills that you acquired as a part of the first project, then in the next project, you are highlighting something completely different. So over here, you're talking about that you have leveraged Tableau to develop a website effectiveness dashboard. So now we have switched here. Now we are trying to highlight some different set of skills. So you are saying that not only you're good in terms of Python, But at the same time, you also have exposure to Tableau. You also know how to build a dashboard over there. And usually dashboard is not just simply, chart after chart, but usually dashboards also have like a storyline. You have to first of all pick like what are some of the key parameters that you would like to keep as a part of your dashboard. So all of those things you can highlight as a part of this project. So whenever you are working on a project like this, you should definitely collate all of the findings, like maybe the dashboard itself, and you can potentially put that as a part of your overall portfolio website, the one that we talked about right in the beginning. So that concludes your second project, and then afterwards you move towards a third project, which is your sentiment analysis. Now, I would say that out of all of the projects that you can do out there, sentiment analysis is something that I have seen the most of the time. So there's like ton of materials which is available out there. So if you want to do any kind of sentiment analysis, you probably need the least amount of guidance, because you just type the sentiment analysis, at least like 5,000 people might have done it already. So it's good to kind of take some of the guidance from the project that people have already worked on. So overall type of things that you want to highlight as a part of this section is that not only you know how to do a sentiment analysis, which is the algorithm which is involved, what type of packages that you use. So that's definitely one of the things that you should highlight. But on top of it, you should also highlight things like that, hey, I used AWS to build a real-time sentiment measurement system for a live chat data stream. Now, this is another thing that you could do as a part of a project on the top of your just basic sentiment analysis, because essentially what you're trying to say is that not only I have exposure to all of these algorithms and how to build it and as a part of Python, but on top of it, I am also fairly comfortable in building different data pipelines. Now, when you're doing a sentiment analysis, you can probably just bin it. And at this point in time, the granularity is not very important as much the concept of things are. So even if you have like top 5 or 6 or maybe 10 different categories of different type of sentiment a person could potentially have, that is good enough to get started as a part of a sample project. And then afterwards, you should definitely mention that the solution is currently live. If you have made it live, of course, then only. But if you're working on a project like this, then you should definitely try to deploy it in the real-time environment. So now, as you can see that I have tried highlighting the different skill set as a part of each of these projects. There's not much of an overlap. But at the same time, even if you have worked on a 2 different project which has a similar sort of a skill set, that's absolutely fine. But the important thing is that you should definitely be able to capture some of the major skill set which is required as a part of that particular role. So now moving on to the next section, which is professional experience. Now this is only applicable for this person given the fact that this person has worked as a teacher for last 10 to 15 years. If you don't have any professional experience, if you're absolutely fresh out of the college, feel free to completely skip this section. Feel free to not have this section, but rather have like a bigger section for your personal projects that you might have worked on. But if you do have a professional experience, do highlight that here. But if you're highlighting that, just have like a very brief description of your current role. Don't add too much of a details. So if your professional experience has some relevant section, then do make sure to highlight this. So say for instance, in this case, this person is a maths teacher and this person has been a maths teacher for last 10 to 15 years, then this person should definitely highlight that, he or she is pretty good in terms of mathematics, because this is one of the core skills that is definitely required to become a good data analyst as you move forward. So hopefully this gives you a good idea about what to include as a part of a professional experience. Then you move on to the last section, which is the awards and recognition and your education. So as I've mentioned earlier, if you have anything which is relevant, so say for instance, if your education is master's in data science, and if you have done it in the last few years, then you should definitely highlight that. And probably you should keep that at the top of your resume right after these core competencies. If not, if there is nothing relevant, or if it is like way too back in the past, maybe 10, 15 years ago, then you should probably keep that right at the bottom. So hopefully this would have given you a good idea about how to make a resume if you're starting off afresh in the data analyst industry. One last thing I would like to mention here is that if this is the first time when you're trying to write a resume like this, then definitely have it reviewed by someone who's working in this industry for some time. If you want for me to review your resume, I would be more than happy to help. Just drop a note in the comment section or just send me an email. I would be more than happy to provide you my guidance. I wish you best of the luck in your learning journey, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much.